Okay. The Global Thursday Forum, our forum, has consistently provided a platform for meaningful dialogue on pressing global issues. Today's topic, the Middle East conflicts and the peace-building efforts, is particularly timely and critical. The ongoing conflicts in the Middle East have caused a devastating humanitarian crisis affecting millions of lives and destabilizing the region. These challenges extend far beyond the region, threatening global peace and economic security. This raises an urgent question. How can the international community move from conflict to collaboration, from suffering to stability together? To explore this vital issue, we are honored to have two distinguished experts with us today. First, our guest speaker, Dr. Muath Khalil Amayreh, a senior lecturer at the Albukhary International University in Malaysia and a specialist in Middle Eastern politics, will provide a comprehensive analysis of the complexities surrounding these conflicts. His expertise will shed light on both the immediate challenges and the pathways toward long-term solutions. Following Dr. Amayreh's presentation, we will be joined by Dr. Kinburaz Jangid, director of the Jindal Center for Israel Studies at the Jindal Global University in India. As our designated discussant, Dr. Jangid will offer valuable insights and complementary perspectives, deepening our understanding of the topic and inspiring thought-provoking questions. I would like to acknowledge our moderator, Dr. Mikio Oishi, Associate Professor at Albukhary International University. Professor Oishi's extensive experience in international relations and conflict resolution will ensure that today's discussion is engaging and insightful. Our agenda includes a presentation followed by Dr. Jang's comments and then a Q&A session where we open the floor for your questions and reflections. Finally, I would like to sincerely thank all of you, our speakers, organizers, and participants from around the world for joining us today. Okay. Now, without other ado, I would like to invite our moderator, Professor Mikio Oishi, to take the floor and guide us through today's session. Mikio-san, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tunho-san. Thank you very much for organizing this opportunity. And of course, this is a very, very interesting topic, today's one. And we have a very good specialist on the issue of Middle East, Dr. Muath Khalil Amayreh. And he is a specialist in Middle East policy, Middle East politics. And he is my current colleague at Albukhary International University. So yeah, I'm very much impressed with his enthusiasm with this topic, this issue, definitely. And also, I have the honor of having Dr. Kimraji Jangid from India. And he is also a specialist in the Middle Eastern politics, maybe more from the perspective of Israel, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think that after Dr. Muath's presentation, I expect a very interesting feedback from Dr. Ranjit, maybe from different angles. And this will definitely make today's seminar very interesting and very thought-provoking. Yeah, and let me introduce briefly Dr. Muath as my colleague. He's a senior lecturer at the Albukhary International University currently. He did his PhD in international law and 2 masters on international relations and international development from several outstanding Australian universities. He used to work at Australian National University as a specialist in international law and international development. He also has an extensive experience in working in collaboration with various Australian governmental departments and intergovernmental organizations. Most notably, he led the highly successful Australian government aid program to Iraq from year 2008 to 2010 and worked with UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, during the Syrian crisis. This one started in year 2011. So anyway, okay, now we are very much excited to listen to what Dr. Muath has to tell for us. So Dr. Muath, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much.
Let me see. One thing. Maybe first, Dr. Muath make a presentation, maybe about 45 minutes or 50 minutes or something. Then followed by the discussion, Dr. Jang Itian, and then maybe I think it's good. And for Dr. Muath to give some short response to Dr. Jangit and Sebian, and then after that, and the floor would be open to the other participants. Sorry. Okay, please go ahead, Dr. Muath.
Thank you very much, my dear colleague, Prof. Mikyu. And of course, thanks very much for everyone. It's a wonderful forum and great to see a number of my colleagues, Prof. Aisha as well. I, quite frankly, when I first asked to talk about the topic, I will have to make a confession before I start. My immediate assumption was that it's about Palestine and the conflict, simply because the current crisis in Palestine, in the occupied Palestinian territories, are overwhelming the entire region. Probably even the international political arena as well, to some great extent. So I immediately jumped into a conclusion and prepared something specifically about Palestine. And I kept looking at the title that we are working on, which is Conflict and in the Middle East, sort of conflicts in the Middle East. And I will admit, the title intrigued me to a great, and not for the best ways. It intrigued me because it has almost the same structure and the same taste, the same sort of assumptions almost about the Middle East, as I have faced throughout my entire life in Australia, working at university, working with government departments. Every time East is mentioned, Palestine is mentioned, Israel is mentioned, the assumption is that, you have the stereotype assumptions. Let me share with you, possibly, some of the assumptions that I'm sure you have come across all the time. I have come across it almost every time I speak to someone. Assumptions, let me just adjust my... the Palestine-Israeli conflict is confusing. It's complex. It carries so many different facts and layers. I'm not sure if you start embarking on or if you embark on on a mission of finding out what's what, you end up with supposedly a confusion and complex situation. Always faced with that. These are the stereotypes. The cover the majority of people, majority of conversations. The Middle East has historically experienced trauma. You know, the Middle East, it's always a troubled area. You know, I've heard that in Australia more than if I had $1 every time I heard that, I'd be very rich. It means a lot of times. You know, and that's basically how they brush it aside. We won't worry about it, etc. On another level, somewhat a little bit more educated, not enough though, educated, they go into the discrimination against Jews, anti-Semitism, manifesting in the modern era of, you know, the worst of it all is the Holocaust. That's a sentence a lot of people start with, believe it or not, when we are speaking about the conflict in Israel. They speak about anti-Semitism in Europe. So many people start speaking for a great deal of period about anti-Semitism in Europe when we are speaking about the conflict in Israel. You'll probably by the end of my presentation know why I find that quite ironically amusing. Also anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, you know, we can cite a lot of anti-Semitism, not only in Europe, but also in few incidents here and there in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, etc. And therefore, there was anti-Semitism, and therefore, immediately, Jewish people have a great deal of trauma. They wanted to make a national home. And finally, they found the well-deserved land that is Palestine. Not Uganda, not anywhere else, not Germany, not part of Germany, not part of England that promised a thing. No, no, no. It's obviously Palestine because they have a historical connection to it. I personally find that, to start with, really difficult to counter. It's honestly the reason why I find it difficult to counter is that it is clear these assumptions, when we start with them, that the person starting with it has a particular bias. Simply because they are almost annihilating a nation, removing from the conversation a group of people who are as human as the Jewish people. To simply start with that conversation, which I've already, again, I title it as stereotype. I was thinking, what are the stereotypes that I come across? So these are some of them. I won't linger a little too much at them. Every one of them would have a half-an-hour response. But there is one simple response every time I think about Palestine and about the Middle Eastern conflicts generally, if we are to talk about Palestinian issue to start with, or mainly. That is really the question. I'm just trying to move my slide, but somehow it's not moving. Just a sec. Is there a button at the...
Okay. Okay, it's moved.
The question I start with, personally, not only as a human, but also as an international, someone who studied international law, is Palestine occupied? I genuinely, and you will see very soon that you don't actually need to get into the very complex layers of history, genocide, Holocaust, are the Jewish people deserve? Of course they deserve peace, like everyone does. But the question you need to ask yourself, I ask myself all the time. And for that, there is no two answers. Is Palestinian land occupied? The answer is 100% it is. There is no dispute about that. No one doubt that fact. From then onwards, it becomes justifying occupation. We need to name it what it is. It's not sympathy, it's not understanding. It is finding a bias in order to justify occupation. It's good to name it what it is. Because if you look at the historical map of Palestine, you will see these are facts. The even more facts is that the ICJ, which is according to within international law, we consider it one of the most conservative judicial bodies and the highest judicial body in the world, states unequivocally that occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, is classified and occupied under international law. The court found Israel's continuous presence in the occupied Palestinian territory to be illegal, citing violation. I would invite anyone that starts with the Palestinian issue is complex to leave aside the long story of history and all the coded bias and start with that. There are people under occupation. Occupation is not new. Occupation is actually entrenched. We are still living, almost every one of us is still living the echo of occupation. It's not something that we are so unfamiliar with. You know, the genocide that happened in Namibia and elsewhere, and the actual atrocities, the famines that happened in India, astounding numbers of people died under occupation. That is what occupation is. At the time, there were people justifying it. At the time, people were finding specific bias. At the time, there were lots of stories to be added. We're coming to civilize, we're mandating, etc. Reality is, it is what it was. It's an occupation stated by the highest entity in the world. Israel's continue, I will continue just reading the finding of the court. This is, by the way, a finding in June 24. I mean, this is, I didn't have to dig any archive to find it. Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful, unequivocal. No need to actually overread into it. Israel must end the unlawful presence. So when we are to talk, hopefully soon, in the last slide of solutions, maybe we should remember that as a possible solution. Israel must end unlawful presence and cease settlement activities. Israel must take make reparation for the damages that's causing these Palestinians. All states and international organizations must not recognize Israel's action and maintaining the status quo. And finally, the UN must take further action to end Israel's unlawful presence. These are terms that, quite honestly, drove the United Nations human rights reporter, Francisca Albanese, to say that Palestine is a test for our humanity, because we all know in international law that a body like ICJ does not make these statements lightly. If they have not got enough evidence, enough beyond any doubt, they would have not made the statements. You may be thinking, is that about Gaza? Actually not. This is a case about West Bank, where there is no alleged terrorists. This is about people who are trying and have signed a peace agreement with the state of Israel. Yet, that's the finding about them. It's not about Gaza. It's not about any state that anyone that's violating their rights. So if we start from there, we will find that despite this fact, I don't think anyone can dispute this fact. No one, despite disputes in occupation, people try for whatever reason to find a justification for occupation, like, like many during other occupation. And during the Holocaust, people wrote in justification for it. Surprised, you study of it. Again, you won't need to scratch the surface for too long to find that. People did justify it in a really good, smooth manner with numbers, etc. Back to the point. The point is that the occupation remained as brutal and inhumane. In fact, it's becoming on the record as the most inhumane, aggressive, brutal occupation ever existed in history. We're having numbers that we've never seen before. The number of, this is 2023. This is 2023, prior to the events in October. That's not a reaction. That's actually something that was happening during that period. In 1,400 Palestinian homes destroyed, 1,870 people were displaced. Settlements. Settlements is when someone comes to your house where you're living now and remove you off your house. It doesn't matter where you go. They demolish your house or take it. The state of Israel approved a huge number of settlements in 2003, prior to October, prior to any violence, current violence that people just highlighting it. The 30,000 also, 30,000 and a half settlement housing units approved. Do you know what approved is? It's actually a process of government. 23,000 of state land removed completely. Settler population, 700,000 in the West Bank. Outposts, 197 outposts. These numbers are despite any peace agreements between the peaceful arm of Palestinians, not the bad guys, just the peaceful guys, the PLO. And sorry for simplifying it like that way, because it's sometimes getting into the details and the nitty-gritty of it is actually literally designed to make it like a complex matter. It's not a complex matter. It's a land being occupied as we watch and as we speak now. There is more settlers armed by a paper, a document given to them by a state, and armed by weapons given to them by states, going into your house. Whatever kids you've got can leave. They will take it. That's the reality on the ground, actually what's happening. There are illegal settlements. Israeli settlements policies violate international law. There is no doubt about that. 5,000 new settlements units approved in the West Bank on Palestinian land. And in 2024, even another 5,200. In 2023, 5,000. In 2024, 5,000. In 2022, similar number. 21, similar number. It's not something, it's not a reaction, I mean to say. It's actually a pattern of behavior. That is theft, occupation, taking people's land, taking people's property. Okay. So, I ask at times myself, why is it that we can't have peace in Palestine? What does it take, really? If I put whatever hat on whichever hat on, academic hat, a Palestinian hat, an Australian hat, whichever hat you want to, an activist hat, a UN employee, a Australian employee, a public servant hat, as long as I am actually looking at it from a proper human perspective, not one-sided, I will find that the violation of international law, which is what we aspire as justice for the inalienable right of self-determination of Palestinian, is, in my opinion, a major obstacle for peace in the Middle East. At least for Palestinians, which I have to be quite honest with you, as I have prepared myself. I initially took, like I said, when I first started, I initially took it as a talk for Palestine. So apologies if I'm not taking the umbrella wider. I got a little bit too carried on, I guess, with what's happening in Gaza. Israel's presence and occupier presence in the occupied territories is inhumane, and it continues to control, violate Palestinian human rights. This situation, the current situation, the previous situation, 23, prior October, 22, 21, is a situation that it's perpetuated by Israel, and it supports unequivocally necessities to resistance. That is also enshrined in international law. It's actually a right enshrined in international law. The international rules-based order continues to fail to meet the responsibility, and that is also one of the major obstacles of peace for Palestinians. Now, maybe to the Palestinians in Gaza were locked up. They are, and they still are, they were previously for 17 years and 75 years, as a matter of fact, in a concentration camp. That's what it was. They were, and previously described as an open-air prison. I think that's starting to look very kind. Description to what Palestinians are going through in Gaza. I think it's a concentration camp, with all what concentration camp actually means. They vented their anger on their occupier with some cases of inhumanity. As a response, the world, yet again, unreservedly condemned Palestinians' action without regard to any context. You know, I was during the Intifada. Intifada was an uprising. There were two Intifadas, one in the 87 and one more recent, actually, after the Oslo Accords in 2000, September, I think, 2000. At the time, I was listening to a talk between our Prime Minister in Australia and one of the scholars. The Prime Minister was very upset about the wave of what was called suicide bombing, where they used to strap themselves and go and kill many poor Jewish citizens of Israel in pizzeria, hospitals, etc. Many Muslim scholars said that's actually un-Islamic anyway. Many said that's actually inhumane, etc. The point of what I'm saying here is that I was listening to this conversation, and I genuinely wondered. I thought to myself, soon enough, Palestinians will stop using that as a weapon. Will the Prime Minister ever say a word about them after that? My guess was no. My guess was the Prime Minister would never. It was a nice wave of issues that are happening in the Middle East. Criticism was laid out for the mistake Palestinians or the wrong way Palestinians are handling the matter. We quashed that. That stopped. We had few scholars talking about it. And then business goes back on. We pay our mortgages, we make our talks, and the business goes on, but not to the Palestinians. That's the point, not to the Palestinians. The condemnation of what has happened in Gaza, I can tell you for now, as a fact, from my experience, when this is over, everyone is going to go into their business. And it's very unlikely that the Australian Prime Minister or the British Prime Minister or many scholars will come and say, okay, now that we have stopped this injustice that the Palestinians are doing, we can now actually address the root cause of the issue. I'm hopeful, but history and experience is demonstrating that this is not the case. It's mainly about shutting down any resistance, quite frankly. Israeli armed by the best militaries in the world, the greatest, the strongest, or some at least, of used it as an opportunity. I don't know, I didn't know if I needed to demonstrate that the action of Israelis in Gaza is inhumane. I think it's beyond proof. The way the Israeli army is carrying itself is clearly genocidal, according to the UN. It meets the threshold of at least genocidal. It was so interesting when the case happened in October, when the October crisis happened, and the Israeli response, I mean, aside from calling Palestinians human animals, it was so interesting that the second reaction was this: we will now shut down their water supplies, their food. We will shut down, pretty much they wanted to shut down the oxygen if they could. But what was interesting in that statement to me was that they had the power to do that. And yet, we don't want to talk about the fact that Palestinians reacted. We want to talk about what they did more than their reaction. We don't want to talk about, well, maybe you should not control people's livelihood so much so that you are treating them in an inhumane way, because they may, God forbid, mirror your behavior. And then we have a problem in this world. That's exactly as I think what is happening. I really liked this. It's from a trooper who ended up burning himself because he could not tolerate the hypocrisy that's happening in this world. Many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during the Holocaust? Slavery, or Jim Crow South, or South African apartheid. We now read it, I teach it to my students. They look at it and say, oh, could it really have happened? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is, you're doing it right now. That's literally what you're doing it. You're either finding an excuses, you're looking at the history of the Nazi, you're looking at whatever it is, there's always a good excuse. But facts remain facts. They don't actually change. Palestinian people are occupied, and I think unless they actually gain their independence, despite all the many sort of twists and turns. We can go through them. I thought of actually laying them out, but then I realized it's very likely going to be easier to just simply state the facts. I do want to share with you this video. I don't know if my internet will allow me. I thought it sort of expresses how, at least how one perspective of seeing this. There are many ways Palestinians can gain their independence. It can be by peaceful resolution. It can be by armed resistance. Both are legitimate under international law. And ethical and moral law, if that exists anywhere. They both are legitimate. Of course, inhumane or a criminal activity against any human is unacceptable. That is out of the question. But is it so important that we sort the problem of how will Palestinians get their independence before we at least make a statement that Israel should leave the occupied territories? Yet again, another bias, another twist. Some start with, the Holocaust, the issues, for Jewish people. Jewish people existed in that land, I know. My grandfather told me. He said to me, my best friend was Jewish. He got greedy and he shot my brother as he left, like these people. That's the truth. So what? They lived there. They lived in England too. They lived in Germany. Don't know if they lived they lived in Egypt. They lived in Poland. I can list a lot of countries they lived in. It makes no difference where they lived in. Why is that even a point? It makes no difference how are they going to seek their independence. It makes no difference. What makes difference is that the international community, we make the difference by stating unequivocally, occupation has to end. Occupation of Palestinian people needs to end. But then we have a very important argument. An argument entrenched in racism, entrenched in actually post-colonial mindset. Would Israelis be safe if they move out of this land? Why do I say it's entrenched in racism? Why do I say it's entrenched in post-colonial? Because you cannot comprehend what colonial master has actually ingrained already, that Arabs are not savages. Israelis are not peace-loving people. They are normal people who would live peacefully with whoever lives peacefully with them. There's lots of examples of that. History demonstrates that. To get convinced that if they move, simply that Arabs are going to just overwhelm them is quite laughable today. They are the power of the region, supported by the biggest power of the region. I give you two evidence to that. You think Jordanians or Egyptians are happy about what's happening today? No. It is, on record, the worst atrocities modern humanity has come across. What do you think they're doing? Nothing. Do you know why? Because they're afraid. Why? Because Israel has the upper hand. Because America, England, Germany are supporting it. It will make no difference if they withdraw to a reasonable territory. That's number one. Number two, if they really are taking this land to keep security at bay, why are they building in shopping centers and homes in it? Why are they giving birth to children in a land that they should be leaving from? They signed a paper that, according to Oslo, ABC, and things, and I wasn't going to get into the details of that. The real argument is that we would like to believe in bias. We would like to believe who we think is a nicer person, not who proved to be the right person. No, not who proved to be the honest person. There are many stories, clear evidence that Israel unequivocally signed papers and did the opposite. Said immense amount of lies. Finally, this is the finding that is today damning. This is the United Nations, and this is the Human Rights Report.
I find that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold in the commission of the crime of genocide against Palestinians as a group in Gaza has been met. Specifically, Israel has committed 3 acts of genocide with the requisite intent, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group.
So when you look at a case like this, is it really necessary that the debate over the many intricacies and layers, or are we able to state clearly that what Amnesty stated in an attempt to end this, that the international response to apartheid must no longer be limited to blame, condemnations, and equivocating? Unless we tackle the root causes, Israel will continue to terrorize Palestinians, perpetuating the cycle of violence which has destroyed so many lives already. The Palestine case is being called the test of our humanity, because the finding in it has become so clear, undisputably clear, and the taking side of not simply saying the right thing has become also a test for humanity, a test for our own humanity, each individual. It's not about being passionate towards a particular people. It may have been 48, possibly, or even during the wars, some kind of diluted facts here and there. Reality is no more. The reality is so obvious, so clear. And I thank you so much for listening to me. I put the timer because I know I'm always guilty of going on and on. my students make it clear to me. So I learned the lesson of putting a timer. So hopefully I got it right, Prof. McHugh.
Okay, fine. Good. Okay, and thank you very much, Dr. Muath, for your very thoughtful presentation on the issues of Palestinian problem. So, okay, so you kind of represent the perspective of the Palestinian people, right? And the historical background and putting the Palestinian issue in the context and also legal perspective. You are the specialist in international relations and ICJ opinion so far. Okay, so this is good presentation and by Dr. Muath. And now, so I would like to ask Dr. Jankit for your feedback as a discussant. So can you start your discussion, please?
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Miki Oishi and Dr. Amayreh. I really followed your deep emotions and the kind of connect that you have with the region. Um, I I think in the beginning it was suggested maybe because I run a Center for Israel Studies that I will present an Israeli perspective here. But I think that won't be more fruitful. I do personally think the issue of Israel and Palestine has to looked out of the binaries. So I'm not going to just present another perspective that will just clash or just deny the perspective presented, keeping in mind the emotions, the history, and the struggle of the Palestinian people. But personally, at a very personal level, I must share the deep anguish and the frustration as a scholar, as an activist, one can feel about what's happening to the Palestinian people. I think that something goes without any political and ideological or perspective disagreements. No matter what one ends up rationally defining the right way ahead, it's a fact that a great amount of Palestinian people have come under a tragedy that will take decades to, in a way, come out. In terms of my own, let's say, takeaways. So one that I share the speaker's anguish and the frustrations, but looking at things from India, not only as an Indian scholar, but somebody who believes in the Gandhian perspective, somebody who believes in India's liberal and third world approach to things. I think when we go back to the history, and I looked at the maps shown to us in the beginning. So when we have the map of historical Palestine in 1948, that's a valid map. But we need to also acknowledge that there was a United Nations partition plan. And that partition plan was rejected by the Arabs as well as the Palestinian leadership, given their anti-colonial, anti-British, or anti-West distrust. That they rejected with whatever their reasons were. But there was a genuinely sincere effort by the United Nations in 1947 to resolve the conflict. So the two-state solution that Yasser Arafat came to acknowledge in 1988 was a right correction. I think when we talk about the historical fact, we do need to talk that in 1948, Israel did not start occupation. There was a two-state solution proposed by the United Nations, something that was later acknowledged as the right way ahead by Yasser Arafat in 1988, and that set the path for historical Oslo peace process. I do think Israel-Palestine conflict is a complex conflict. Occupation is a fact, but that's not the only fact. There has to be a regional dimension into this conflict. There has to be some amount of attention to the external powers, that the kind of manipulations that the American or the British interests did in this conflict. So I think there is a complexity to it. I don't think highlighting the occupation and highlighting Israel as quote unquote, the original sin in the Middle East will help us as a scholars to give any kind of a meaningful analysis. In order to understand the stereotypes and assumptions that come into the problems about the Middle East, I think it's also important to look at the objects in a more distanced manner. If I give the example of India, India did not establish diplomatic relations with Israel from 1950 till 1992. And India did, in a way, represent the cause of Palestinian people in a very meaningful manner at all international forums. But the fact that India did not have diplomatic relations for those 42 years wasn't the fact that Israel was actually at fault for all the ills in the Middle East in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. India's foreign policy interest and the sensitive relations with the Arab world were more driving factor for that diplomatic distance. And that's why in 1992, when India does open diplomatic relations, it is still managed a very balanced support to the Palestinian cause. So I think I hate personally in many individual cases to say that there has to be a balance. But there is a middle path here, and that balanced perspective has to be restored, which means not to rob Israel of empathy for what happened on October 7th was an act of terror on the people. And I think there are still women, civilians, and even the foreign aid workers who got caught and kidnapped by, an armed group of the Palestinian people. I think violence and I think it's a one thing to say, well, Palestinians can choose to pick up arms, but it's another thing to say, well, that doesn't have a very, very, long rope to be used at any object. I think you mentioned very clearly the case of the suicide bombing. My own PhD was about Benny Morris and his works upon the 1948 war. And the case of Benny Morris is exactly the case of the death of the Oslo peace process and the death of the peace camp in Israel. Israel is, after all, a country that did sacrifice its prime minister for the sake of Oslo peace process. That a significant religious population of Israel disagreed with the political class of Israel at that time. And that political class, Yitzhak Rabin and centrist or peace camp people at that time, did believe that there has to be a just solution to the conflict and Palestinians have to have their own state. So I think there are many internal struggles that go into the life of the Israeli state. And by clubbing it as an occupying country, as a settler colonial country, we rob any chance of its complexity and the Middle Eastern case. I can go on many other points, but I don't want to really pick all my disagreements of the conversation. I think that's not important. It's not. I just illustrate one or two examples to underline that in any conflict resolution, in any conflict transformation, one cannot be robbed of empathy and acknowledgement. I do understand this long struggle of the Palestinian people, but I do not think they can claim a self-righteous narrative for themselves. The leadership problem, the use of the violence, all kind of radical religious elements into this conflict, the role of Iran into this conflict. I think that has to be talked about, that yes, this national movement is also capable of making serious mistakes, the kind that Yasser Arafat did when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Saddam Hussein was removed by force in an international manner, but Yasser Arafat ended up saying, well, Kuwait is Iraq at that time in the 90 Gulf crisis. So I think historically, it won't be, I don't think it will harm the Palestinian cause if one is critical of the Palestinian decision making. I don't think uh, a supporter, somebody who really feels for the Palestinian movement, uh, should offer a very blank check to that national movement. I think that critical friendship is also very important. So I think as a scholar and uh, as somebody who deals with this subject in teaching as well as in my writing, I do think that there has to be a balance in terms of understanding this conflict. Without that balance, I think we will keep harping on our stories and narratives, but they won't meet, and it will just fuel more radicalization on both sides, Israelis as well as on the Palestinian side. Since the conversation was about Middle Eastern conflicts and peace building, I just want to give you an example of something that I have been fascinated in the last 4 or 5 years in what's happening in the Middle East. There are several new things that have taken place in the Middle East following Abraham Accords. Now, Abraham Accords is a cold peace, the kind of peace that government to government is imposed. It's not a peace that gets support by the people, but these kind of peace, uh, uh, episodes open floodgates for many other uh, conversations. So after following the Abraham Accords, you have India's involvement in the region, which brings the region to Asia or Europe through economic and religious missions. But the role of the regional actors is also very important. So if I present to you an example from UAE, United Arab Emirates has been doing something very fascinating for the last 10 years. They have opened a Ministry of Coexistence and Tolerance, and they have given a new approach to religious diplomacy where they actually promote pluralism, coexistence in the Middle East, and they start from their own land. So they inaugurated a huge temple in UAE. They inaugurated a mosque, a church, and a synagogue. So I think there are many other peace building episodes in the Middle East that we can also talk about. That is just not a dark, gloomy, hopeless, conflict-ridden place. I think there are many people-to-people developments that have taken place in the last decade. And I'm personally fascinated by UAE's, moderation. In fact, many times I give example to some of my friends in the field of Israel studies that the more Israel has become religiously violent and radical, the Gulf countries are actually more progressive and moderate and religiously open towards the other religions. So it's very ironical that Israel was imagined to be, uh, uh, a model for the nations or model for before the occupation, by the way. I'm talking about the 1948, early 50s, when Israel was really trying to be an example of democracy and open society and religiously very liberal society. That's not the case with Israel now. Israel is extremely conservative and violent to a certain extent towards its own people of secular and non-religious threads. So I think Middle East is more than the Israel-Palestine conflict. Of course, the Palestinian conflict has to be looked at all the time, but I do beg for a balanced perspective. No matter there are problems of that balanced perspective, but I believe in certain part of Buddhism, and according to Buddhist philosophy, there is always a middle path. And I think there has to be a middle path for the outsiders to look into this conflict. Well, I hope I was in a way meaningful in whatever I could add, and I look forward to more conversation after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jangit, for your feedback. So, so what I had taken from your feedback is that basically maybe of course maybe it depends on the person, right? And maybe you are Indian, right? Indian, and I'm Japanese, so the both of us are kind of the maybe the outsider. So at least outsider maybe can take the maybe middle way, as you say. So from here, so basically you emphasize that and all the people and Israel, right? Israel, and also, of course, Israel has also Jewish people and also Arab people, right? And then also there are something, some relationship, and also the Palestinian people, Arab people, and so you are maybe talking about maybe how the equal how they say engagement with those people. So that we need to know each side's story, of course, and we need to understand the deeper, right? And then maybe at least for us, maybe outsiders, maybe we may contribute to this long-standing problem. So I'm sorry, and my understanding is rather poor. And, but anyway, so before opening the floor to the other participants, maybe I will ask Dr. Muath for your maybe short response to Dr. Jangit's feedback. Thank you.
Now I can talk. Thank you so much for that. It's really lovely. I mean, I feel passionate about the Palestinian cause, not because I have Palestinian ancestry. You don't have to have that to feel passion about people who are, for the third generation, being slaughtered and killed by a terrorist state living across the border. You don't have to. You really don't. It's actually a humanity thing. You can be in India and still feel the same thing. You can be in Japan. You can be in Malaysia. I feel the same when I see an African student of ours and he tells me the story of the French colonialism. I feel the same. It's an actual matter of fact. I mean, there are so many points. I love the fact that our dear doctor here is focusing on the fact that the Middle East is not all negative. Of course, there is lots of positive things in it, and that's a good thing. And I do admit, my apologies, I did not widen it up too much. So I don't know what the word balance in this context entails. I know what the word balance means. I know what the word balance actually means. And the middle way, I know what it means. I just can see any option, practical options, not theoretical words, not terms like, when we do that, we rob the balance of any chance of making progress. What does that mean? Does it mean removal of occupation? There is no way I would give, at least personally, I would give Palestinians in their way, whatever their way is, an open blanket. Absolutely not. I am very critical of it. But to say that they deserve freedom just like me and you is not. It's got nothing to do with how they obtained it. That's a point I made, that I disagree with how they're arriving to these conclusions at times, and they themselves disagree, like we do in Australia, like in Malaysia. People fight in the parliament, people argue, sometimes they actually throw punches. But to have the freedom, my apologies, Doctor, I haven't heard a single sentence that entails that Palestinians deserve freedom. There is a lot of balance. Is Israel now, and has been for the last 17 years, committing violence towards Palestinians? Yes. Anyone in dispute? It would take you 2 minutes to check it out. Why is it that we are unable to mention it first before we talk about the 7th of October? Fine, I'm happy to talk about the 7th of October. That's the point I said. I'm actually happy to talk about the suicide bombing. But as long as that's not where the conversation ends. If the Israeli violence today is justified in Gaza, you have just become a Hamas member. You know why? Because you have just set a perimeter that Hamas is being really, really quite moderate with. Hamas went in 7th of October and caused a crime and killed people and captured people, some 1,500 if you want to exaggerate the number. That's wrong, and it deserves that reaction. Well, that's if you want to start the story from here. Because if you want to start the story from where you should start the story, Hamas's reaction is very mild, according to the standards you have set. Because they have mowed the lawn. That's a term proven, guy. Amnesty talked about it. This is nothing to do with being passionate about connected to the region. This is passion for a human standard that I wish, not hypocritically talk about, I wish to apply everywhere. I wish to apply it for the indigenous. I worked for the indigenous people of Australia for 3 years in absolute very difficult conditions because I am passionate about actually helping these people. I don't have to be indigenous. I'm very far from them genetically. The issue is, the fair issue is to say a balance when Palestinians gain their freedom. Of course, the fact that Arafat, and this is often quoted to me, the fact that Arafat and Arabs rejected the 48 peace, is that how Gandhi or anyone would have measured their moral standards? The fact that at the time they rejected it, therefore every other action of injustice is okay? Why are we even stating that? The fact that Israel is not currently at the 48 borders is an immoral act of occupation. If Arabs rejected it or wrong or were right, we can talk about that. I know, I mean, that would take an hour and a half if I get into it, and I don't want to get into it for that reason. I'm only saying, as a lawyer, very clear cut, where do we measure the standard moral standards from? They can go back if these guys rejected it, and then we'll see who attacks them. And we cannot ignore the 48, the Haganah. You can't talk about the 48, the 47 and a desire without the massacres the Haganah has done to the Palestinian population. This is documented. Haganah is a terrorist group that went on massacring Palestinians and killing them and throwing their villages. When we study the history of Israel, we should also study the action of Israelis. So if we want to put the 48 into context, we will have some time, but I just want to give a small glimpse on the fact that to say the 48 and Arabs rejected it without context, I don't think that's very fair for Palestinians, quite frankly. So in my opinion, to have the balance, to have the middle way, it's in Islam too. It's enshrined. It's actually a verse in the Quran. What does it actually translate to? and occupied people. I have a colleague. His father has been there in prison, Israeli prison, in and out, for 20 years of his life. They walked in recently and grabbed whatever children they want. His wife's daughter. That's the balance. Does that sound like a balance? Why are we not calling that into account? Why is it that we're talking about the balance when I say something like, they have the right for freedom, they have the right to bear arms? Where is the balance of the violence that's happening today? Only just now we have a wonderful news that Benjamin Netanyahu is called by the ICC to arrest warrant. He's a potential international criminal. Why don't we talk about that? 7th of October, quite frankly, as horrifying as it is, and as much as I disagree with it in some of its action, is minuscule in comparison to what Israelis have done to Palestinians prior to that. And before people talk about that, you will know 100%, not 99%, that it's based on bias, because we can talk about that first. That's all. Bias in research as a scholar and as academic. By the way, you can have passion. Gandhi, if he didn't have passion, real passion, although subtle, he would have not survived the pressure they put on him. He had a passion that would drive mountains. He may have manifested it in his own way, but we cannot say that others can't manifest it in their own way too, as long as it's a just passion. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Muath, for your response to Dr. Jangit's feedback. So, I think that Dr. Jangit want to respond again, but today, maybe it's good for maybe both two of you maybe continue this dialogue, maybe after this session. But now it's good for us to maybe hear the opinions or feeling or anything else. So from the audience. And maybe our audience, some are very knowledgeable about the Palestinian and the Middle East issue, and some are not. So this is an open forum, so anyone can speak and their mind and their view, whatever. So maybe now I want to open to the floor. So Zam, do you want to say, right? But
Yes.
you are your response seems to be very long. Maybe you will make it short to please give a rather easy comment.
Sorry,
that,
give a what?
rather easy comment or question, and so that other people can speak maybe after you, rather than very specialist comment.
No, don't worry, Mikio. I'm a very simple person. I just speak directly. Yeah, don't worry. Not too much. Academic jargons or theories or perspectives. I just want to have a say on the matter a bit. Okay, I just first of all, congratulations, Dr. Muath. That was a very good presentation. I think it's a comprehensive and well balanced presentation, and although I think you also have put some kind of control as to what you want to present. I noticed that as well. I mean, you could have said more, but then I think you control yourself. But and then Dr. Jangit's response to your presentation, talking about balance and all those things. I agree with the response of Dr. Muath. And anyway, I'm not Palestinian, so I'm talking from the perspective of a Malaysian observer looking at
you're a human.
Yeah, yes. I'm a human. Yeah, sometimes Uh, but we are looking at it from the perspective of humanity, and then when we're talking about balance and middle path and all these things, I mean, this all sounds nice, but then let's be practical and let's be realistic. If you want to have a balanced perspective, I agree with Dr. Muath that you have to look at it from a more historical view, looking at the situation, from before October 7th, and the kind of things that have been done by the Israelis on the Palestinian territory, on the Palestinian people, all this while, and at the same time trying to find a peaceful solution, having discussion with various Palestinian authorities, the PLO and all the other groups, but at the same time not really accepting, or even neglecting the decisions made by international organizations, including the UN. And I agree, with Dr. Muath that when the UN said that what you are doing is illegal and what you are doing is against international law, a rational actor would say, okay, I realize that it is irrational. I realize that it's illegal. I will stop. But that's not the situation. Because the action has been perpetrated over the years, and that in itself, is contributing, to the problems, and then that has also resulted in the shrinking of the Palestinian territory and all those things. So. And then when we talk about the Israeli state, they have a right to protect themselves. Yes, of course, everybody have a right to protect themselves. But then we are saying that everybody except the Palestinian, because I would argue that the Palestinians also have a right to protect themselves. With all the atrocities that have been done against them over the years, people will do, things, when they are in a situation, that they say that we cannot get out of the situation unless we do something drastic. That has always been the case, with humanity. So we have to look at it. If we are talking about balance, we have to look at it in a balanced kind of way. Both sides protecting themselves, protecting their interests. Okay, so but that's just some of my comments. But I want to know, Dr. Muath, what do we do now? What do we do now? With the current situation, there has been, some kind of stalemate. You have not really mentioned about what are the short-term and long-term solutions, for the Palestinian issue. And then, I mean, we know already that there have been some attempts in the past at creating, for example, a two-state solution. And is the two-state solution, which actually has been approved, by the UN, agreed by the UN, but it's never been, really implemented. So is that still on as two-state solution, in the long term? But in the meantime, what we do in the short term, what can we do? What can the international, community do, for this situation, taking into account that Israel basically don't care, about the international law, about international community, but at least, I think international community should, try to think of something, to move forward. So what do you think the international community should do, given this particular context, and especially, the Muslim international community, the OIC and other Muslim countries, we have been, not so vocal about what's been going on. I mean, they have been vocal here and there, but they're not sustaining, their voices. So what do we do? How do we get out of this, Dr. Muath? Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, so the Sam's question is rather clear, I think. So the looking forward, what we can do, international community and also United Nations or whatever organization. So maybe the Muath can respond, maybe short term and long term, and including the two-state solution, whether it's still valid or not, and Yeah, please. Muath.
Thank you so much for the comments and for the question. Look, the issue about the many attempts to create peace and a two-state solution between Israel and the occupied Palestinians have failed. Every single one of them have failed. Even the very peace in the six after the at many, I can go through the list. At many stages it failed. Oslo was signed by both. Not one single box of Oslo was ticked by Israel. The very likely reason for that, if we are to use very simple deductive and reasoning, we will find out that Israel has a desire to further subjugate people of Palestine and further steal land. The map I showed in my presentation is a real map. It's a fact yet again. It's law. It's obvious. It demonstrates more theft and subjugation of land. So I am not sure if people of Israel have the desire to make peace. Throughout history, they made peace only when they were forced into it. And that is a very scary statement. I pray to God that's not how it continues to go. For the sake of all humanity, I pray to God that Israelis would actually come to their senses and realize that they can make peace without being forced into it. You see, the idea here is, you could see the idea, 48, they rejected it, so we take more. 74, they rejected it, so we take more. It's the idea that we offer you something. If it's not 100%, you hesitate around it. And by the way, even if you sign it like Oslo, we will still attempt to take more. We will still take more, and we are protected. We're simply protected. So what I pray for, and I think we all should pray for, is that the terrorizing nature in the state of Israel can become a more peaceful nature. Because the way they establish themselves is terror. You read the very foundation of their history was terror. And I think this terror is actually eating them from inside. It's a very negative way of perceiving the world. So I pray for all humanity, not just for Palestinians, but also for peace-loving Jewish people, for anyone, that the terror nature that is entrenched, the political nature, we call it, the political culture in Israel, to become more peaceful and less terrorist-like. That's because I believe in dua, I believe in prayer, and the power of prayer. I would start with that. As political entities, or maybe as people, because we're not speaking here in a foreign affairs summit, we're just people. As people, I think that we have few tools in our hands. Most of them are long-term. Tools like basically not buying even one product that supports Israeli things, so the boycott movement. Even one thing. If you can't buy everything, if you can't stop from everything, you can at least stop one thing or two things. Why? Because they declare clearly that we are supporting, we're giving arms to a terrorist state. I think one of the biggest missions that we would have, biggest mission, is the next generation. Next generation cannot be. We have to address, we have to talk to the next generation. We have to know that this is a generational battle. we have to, and I'm not saying to teach the next generation to go to war. I'm actually teaching them first to decolonize, remove the colonial mindset. I don't have to look at the Arab world building a lot religious or tolerance momentum and say, look at them, finally, they're amazing. Look at the term finally there. I'm not assuming that someone said that. I just gave it an example because it's in my head. So apologies. I didn't mean to put an example into an example. That's not what it is. But I mean to say, we need to raise our next generation in a way that looks at Palestinians the right way. You'll be surprised, lots of people don't even know about it. Spreading awareness and cutting it to the point. These today, social media, public opinion matters immensely. And finally, maybe as a people, patience. Patience. It will come about that that Palestinians will have their freedom. I truly, in my heart, believe that. But not without a price and not without patience. Maybe my answer, it doesn't have a massive sort of political plan. It's only because I believe in the power of these small things a lot more than speaking to a foreign minister who eventually may change their minds for ulterior motives. I hope I answered the question. Sorry. I know maybe you wanted a political answer, but I actually do believe that in the on the ground changes to our generation, to people, and would be much more powerful.
Okay, thank you, Muath. So related to your answer, maybe I would like to ask you one question. Actually, but somehow, but anyway, maybe can you just give me short answer? So maybe in my view, maybe sorry to be maybe too political, but it seems that two-state solution may be no longer viable. I think then in that case, one-state solution. Of course, one solution is maybe to expand the occupied area by the Israel government, right? And then to achieve the greater Israel, right? And this is one option, and this is not so good for the future. Another possibility is maybe Israel eventually abandon the Zionism, and maybe Israel become the multiracial, multi-religious country, like many of other countries. What do you think about this possibility? Is it possible that Israel eventually abandon Zionism and the country become how do I say more multicultural, multi-religious, and multiracial? And what do you think about this possibility? Maybe can you give me a maybe short answer, please?
Yeah, sure. I think both solutions have serious challenges, and they are a potential. I mean, one state, I've heard a number of times that two-state solution is no more viable. The reasons I could gather from why people are saying they're not viable, it's not viable, are the settlements, they can be removed. I tell you what, houses of 2.5 million people were removed. I'm sure settlements can be removed as well. Maybe not by bombing them, but we can. The international community can find a way of managing that if that's the only obstacle. But also, one-state solution does not mean the destruction of anyone. The one-state solution has its serious challenges as well. One of the first challenges you mentioned, which is Israel abandons its Zionist mentality, that we deserve a national home and we get to choose it. And someone who doesn't own that land gets the right to give it to us. If they abandon that mentality, we would start. I mean, that's exactly what happened. England has no right in Balfour Declaration to give Israel that land. They didn't have it. The assumption starting from 48 is, something that can be dismantled as well. The idea here is that if the Jewish people of Palestine abandon the mentality of the bigger Zionist state, then possibly, but that's a very big challenge. And I think that's the main challenge in one-state solution.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And actually now so other people already raising hand, but also I would like to look at chat box, and there's a statement of question by Lim Jin Chao. Can you hear? Are you listening? And because you mentioned that about anti-Semitism and the history of the movements, right? And these movements. So can you, if possible, can you explain what you want to ask? And your writing is a bit long, so if possible, Lim Gim Zhao. Are you with us? Okay. Okay, then the next writing comment is, written comment is by Sun-ho-san. So Sun-ho-san is interested in the next President Trump, how his inauguration into the next US president will impact the situation. And of course, he was working on the Abraham Accord, right? And then this one means the reconciliation between Israel and the Arabic countries, right? And then, but the problem is maybe marginalization of the Palestinian people. Yeah, and many people are actually looking forward to and his own inauguration. And this coming 2 months would be too long in many things. But Sun-ho-san wants to know and to get your view on the President Trump and its impact.
Well, so President Trump previously, when he's in power, he advocated the deal of the century, and the details of the deal of the century are by far bias and handing Israel a lot more land and a lot more power. If he maintains that mentality, then we will have another round of probably oppression in different forms, resistance in other forms, and it could, and it may not, but it could likely, if history has anything to show us or teach us, it could cause another resistance in different forms. If he abandons the deal of the century, which is very unlikely, then all possibilities are open. The reason I say is unlikely, it's because his son-in-law is a settler. He is one of the people who his family stole, or his wife's family stole land from Palestinians and taking it. So I'll be very surprised if he has a fair mind about it.
Okay, thank you, Muath. So now two people are raising hands. So Kan Mikio-san, so maybe you have something to say, or maybe I want to ask a question.
Yes. Maybe the question, but before that, thank you very much for your very clear presentation, and I maybe fully agree with your opinion. And so I'd like to ask that there was writing in the Amnesty International, the international response to apartheid must no longer be limited to blunt condemnation and equivocation. Unless we tackle the root causes, Israel will continue to terrorize Palestinians. And so unless we tackle the root causes, this is the key word, I think. And in this case, you mean that the root causes, it means a settlement of in the Palestinian by Israeli people, Jewish people. And so how do we tackle this root cause? Or root cause, when we say root causes, there would be some other problems or matters. And so how do we face, how should we face the matter? Up to now, as you explained, any trial to solve this problem failed. And so what can we do? That's the question I'd like to repeatedly ask you.
The root cause, I agree with you. Thank you so much for your comment. The root cause is the settlement. The root cause is the occupation. The root cause is the fact that Palestinians have no legal representation. The root cause, no legal representation. That is the foundation of feeling justice within a society, is to be able to actually complain to a legal entity that you believe is fair. The root cause is that they remain to controlling the water, the plumbing. You cannot build a house. You cannot actually gather rainwater. There's something called rain law, water law. You cannot collect water from rain in order to keep it, save it, in order to use it for things. You can only use the water from the pipes, which is controlled by Israelis. This occupation is the root causes. The fact that my friend, his daughter, his wife is pregnant, and they are afraid, because her pregnancy is difficult, that she will die on a checkpoint before she gets to a hospital. That is the root cause. How do we end that? By ending the occupation. What do? We continue to the most of our ability to make noise, to demonstrate that this is not a matter of Palestinian against Israelis, Hamas against Israel. This is what they would like us to call it now. Narrow it even further. Before it was the Muslim world against Israel. Then it's the Arab world against Israel, smaller group. Then it became, Palestinians against Israel. Now it's Hamas against Israel. When we get rid of Hamas, it's all over. That's the implied psychological mindset for this. It's not true. It actually is humanity against Israel. Being humane is against Israel these days. I think that's clear. And I think what we can do as individuals is demonstrate that to people, apply that, practice that, say that. It's no more a complex matter, as much as they'd like to tell us that it's a complex issue. It's an occupation, and the only balanced situation is freedom of occupation. That's what a balance is. And this is what we need to state to people. And I think forum like this is a very big, beautiful, wonderful way of doing things. Like I said, boycotting, saying it to your representative, actually making an effort of putting it out to your representative in whatever country you are, saying it to your students if you teach, saying it to your staff, making them know that this is my position about this. Not aggressive position, it's just simply a position of standing against that. And I think that has a bigger power than anyone can imagine. It's a movement that I hope will make a big difference.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think Dr. Aisha,
She also waiting.
You are raising a hand, right?
Okay.
So after that, your time to
Okay.
give a comment or question.
Thank you, Prof. Mikio. Just to echo again what Muath says, I think there's always this tendency for many people, to always shape the conflict as a conflict between Muslims and non-Muslims, Palestinians versus the Israels, when it is really about humanity. The same way, or even the conflict between somebody who's a bully and somebody who is being bullied. And that's exactly what happened with Ukraine and Russia. But how come with Israel and Palestine, we don't want to use this, similarity, of the situation? But then my point is actually, besides looking at the conflict actors themselves, Palestine and Israel as states, as a community, as a society, we also know very well that a very important factor in any conflict and peace is really the third party. And we cannot deny that US as the main third party has been failing. It has failed both parties, and it has failed the whole international community. Even with UN, it's US who is number one in trying to prevent any resolutions at the UN. So I think it's also, good to hear from both speakers, Mr. Jangid and Dr. Muath, if they have any ideas, who could be another third party, do you think? I mean, we do understand that, yes, US remains to be the number one owners of weapons and manufacturing weapon, but then at the same time, as international relations academicians, we are also aware that now is actually an interesting time for all of us in the international community, because we are really looking at these changes in balance of power, with Asia and, with Europe and US. So perhaps any ideas from both of you, who could potentially be another third party in this conflict and peace process between Israel and Palestine?
Okay, thank you. Maybe before Dr. Muath answer, Dr. Jangid, can you stay a little bit longer here?
No, Professor Jangi, Dr.
Yeah.
his
He
time
needs
to
to leave
leave.
now.
I already allow him. Excuse, because he's for another schedule. Okay.
Yes.
Mm.
Okay. Muath, can you respond to Aisha's question?
Yeah. I think it's the difficulty of having another third party is that, as it is in international relations, I mean, that's we teach in international relations often that a country may not necessarily need these resources, yet they occupy it. And the reason being is that if they don't, someone else may. So the terrible fact is that it would be very difficult for a third party to interfere in the American affairs with Israel without causing a serious conflict. Superpowers or powers of the region. I mean, we know where Europe stands. Most of it, actually, not all of it, but it's even European countries that are willing, like Spain and Irish Ireland, etc. They are still they're at a stage of acceptance, but far from wanting to actually make a stand. At some stage, the Arab world assumed Erdogan. At some stage, the air in the Arab world, you can hear the news. Everyone was assuming Erdogan of Turkey would be the hero who finally sort of balances it. And not long after that, you can see the tremendous disappointment in the air of Erdogan's behavior towards it generally. But some may agree, some may disagree with Erdogan, but that's not the point. The Arab world, not possible. The powers, so in summary, any power that is capable militarily to interfere, because it is, after all, a military interference that's required, or at least a military posture that is required, would cause a serious conflict. And major powers would consider that 5 times over before taking that step. Hence, it's very unlikely. Very unlikely. It's most likely going to remain the US until a sane US president, sorry to use this term, not too academic, but a fair US president to the Palestinian cause comes about. That's my sort of humble reading of the situation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Muath. So, are there any other questions?
I think Constantina has a question.
Oh, Constantina.
Constantina from Greece.
Yeah.
History teacher.
Ms. Constantina, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you a lot. Everybody said it was, I agree, very clear, very passionate. I'd like to understand more, but I don't know if there is a time, because I was very tired from the work and perhaps I lost some things. What do you mean that occupation has to stop? What does it mean to you concretely? How occupation stops? Theoretically, if we could, let's say, press Israel, how can you imagine the end of occupation?
Thank you very much. In international law, we define a state in generally 4 categories. A defined borders, permanent population, sort of a defined border and permanent population, a government, and an ability to conduct international relation. This is a sovereign state, generally. I think if we aim for that, sovereignty of a Palestinian state, its ability to have its government controlling its own affairs, its ability, which means print out its own money, which means have its own strategies for water, for electricity. It means that it has a defined, clear border that people recognize, states generally recognize. That's, by the way, that's a Montevideo Convention 1993, so it's quite an established set of rules. And its ability to engage in international relation without the interference of another state, without sort of the control. Interference is always there. So these aspects of Palestinian life does not exist, mainly the last 2.
Yes, but what about Israel? To go to choose another country, or stay there and come in other borders? What about Israel?
Yeah, Israel is a state. Israel, according to international law, is a state. That's not independent. It's already been recognized by the United Nations and majority countries. It's actually, according to international law, is a state. That despite that Israel continually, every time there is an actual debate, mention the fact that, oh, what about us? There is no what about us. It's a state. When we talk about the Palestinians receiving their occupation, according to international law, there are borders that are recognized. If the 2-state solution is valid, well, that's fine. If not, well, the entire state will have to include these 2 parties or all the parties within it. Does the removal of the state, a state, mean anything about removal of its population or its ethnicity? This is a technical question, but I actually want to get into it because it's an important one. When I say, for instance, what countries, Malaysia and Indonesia wants to join and call it Millennia, have I affected the very state structure of these two countries? Yes. But did I necessarily call for the genocide of Malaysia? No. Malaysian people? No. Did I call for the eradication of Indonesians? No. To have a state is not necessary. For people who call for one state, I'm not an advocate of either. I'll be really honest. I'm an advocate of humanity and freedom for everyone. So I don't want to advocate the two-state solution or the one-state solution. These are two things that are debated on a political level. But even a one-state solution, I would argue, does not necessarily mean the eradication of any ethnicity. I sincerely pray to God that's what it means. Removal of a state as a political structure does not all the time, does not mean the removal of the ethnic people of it. So to go back to the answer in a very simple manner, if Palestinians have their state as a separate state, as a second state, with a defined border, clear government, and ability to engage in international relations, and Israel exists along near it peacefully, so be it. That's great. That's fantastic. Both can actually just go on with their life and live peacefully. If Israel wanted that long, it would have happened. They simply have the power. We can all see how much power they've got. If they want to choose to live in one state and manage the challenge of the challenges that come with that, also fine, I think. And that doesn't mean that's the end of Palestinians or Jewish people. I hope I answered the question.
Oh, yeah, okay. I try. It's clear for me more your thought now. It's more clear your thought, but it's difficult for me to understand how, with the borders in Gaza and the West Bank, how a state really can have resources. It's very small. It's very not viable. Even if, and the other problem is who is going to press Israel to do that. In my opinion, they had to press Israel to come to talking and find a solution. That's clear for me. But who is going to press it in reality? And Palestinians, are you sure that Palestinians want a state in West Bank and in Gaza? And it's viable. Is it viable? I don't know. One state is more viable for me from the zero. Yes, but very difficult in a real life. Very difficult. But the other two, going to a small piece of land and the other West Bank there, how can be viable? How can be with any resources to live? It's a very, I don't know, but it's more clear for me, your thought. I have some objections, but the time is not really objections because, as you said, it's nice to stay clear to the violence and to the attempt of eliminate as a kind of freedom to Israel from a problem, let's say. But it's a little bit complex, the situation. It is a little bit complex, but perhaps we don't have to focus on that. It is complex because occupation is about, as you say, why England gave. Oh, because he could, because this was the colonial power. It's not Israel, the colonial power. I live in Balkans. we have a war, every nation of independence to a great power, Ottomans. Okay, but I can't say that Ottomans had my land. Okay, we made the revolution and we got a land. We got a land by a revolution. It was not our land because there were no borders before. With Ottomans, with Byzants, there were no borders. With England, there were no borders. It was Ottomans before England. No borders. So it's a little complicated to go behind. And Zionism, for me, Zionism means nothing. Zionism is a kind of nationalism today. And Palestinians need nationalism too, to exist, to say, I exist. So don't talk about Zionism. Netanyahu and Israel act, as you say, almost a terrorist state. That's true. But it's not about Zionism. They are nationalists, they are far-right, alt-right now. It's very beloved by alt-right now. It's very beloved by people that 20 years ago, 10 years ago, they would hate Israel and they hate in their country Jews. Trump, don't tell me Trump loves Jews in United States. No, but because alt-right is the same with Netanyahu now, and all is about Muslim, against Muslim. Trump wants no Muslim in USA. So they say it's a dog, Israel, to keep Muslims away. But it's not about, how can I say, it's Sun Wukong asked, it's the situation now in politics that favors Israel. And that you say that people have to speak. In Greece, we are very fond of Palestinians in common public opinion since Arafat. Since Arafat, he was very beloved, Arafat. But it's not easy to make something with all this support, because they have to be people like ONU, USA, but not the USA with Trump, of course, who have to press for talking. And the talking must be radicalized. I agree that the talking must be very radical. Because for me, it's not viable to live in Gaza and have a little piece of earth in West Bank. It's not viable. You have nothing. And this make the things more symbolic than real. Symbolism doesn't end. We have to make things real, and the land real, and the states real.
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree with you, if you don't mind. I fully agree with you very quickly.
But it's a kind of a little complex.
Yeah. I just want to add one small thing. I fully agree. It may be the two states with Gaza separated from West Bank is a complex matter. How can we actually address this is a complex matter. Yes, you heard it from me. But when I was saying it's not complex, I wasn't actually at all, and I know that you didn't suggest that. I'm just saying generally to everyone. I do believe as to how exactly should we resolve the matter may require some complex thinking, of course. What I emphasize on is that the Palestine-Israel conflict is not a complex matter in as much as it's a clear occupation that needs to be cleared out. That's not complex. That's where we start. That's where we start. I simply refuse to start with anyone about, the Ottomans story and how they collapsed, etc. There are many, many, many people we all know that's reported by the United Nations, reported even by Israeli, by England, everyone, that there are tens of thousands of Palestinians kicked out of their homes to make space for Jewish people from Europe. What exactly is the Ottoman argument? The Ottoman argument there was no borders and now we came and took our land. But does that remove, again, occupation is very clear cut. Occupation is that you came and took people's land forcefully. Now you took it forcefully. How do we address that problem? May be complex, but what is not complex is that it's occupation. It's a very clear occupation.
Okay, thank you, Muath. So now we need to finish soon, but Zam maybe wants to say something. Maybe you are the one who will be the concluding remarks. Maybe Zam.
Well, thank you, Mikio. I know that time is running out already, so my apologies, for taking, for making this into overtime, but I was just, while listening, I remember last time when we were talking about Myanmar issue, Mikio, you mentioned about the right moment, when is the right moment, to solve the conflict. And I would think that, the right moment is now, because one important factor for a right moment is a mutually hurting stalemate. And I think that we have a stalemate now in the Palestine, Israeli issue, because, we cannot move forward. It's a stalemate. Nobody can win the war. Israel cannot win the war, although it is trying to basically, win over Gaza, destroying all elements of Hamas over there and all those things. But I don't think, they can win the war. And of course, the Palestinian Hamas also cannot win the war. So I think we are in a right moment situation now, on this particular issue. So moving forward, when we have a right moment, let's talk about how to move forward. First of all, of course, we have to come to some kind of ceasefire, on both sides. And then with a ceasefire agreement, both sides should agree to stop whatever military or armed actions that that they are doing, for talks, to begin. Okay, so if that is the next step, then my question is in regards to who then do we invite to the table to talk, on how to move forward, because we are talking about Israeli and the Palestinian. Of course, you have the Israeli government on one side, but then on the Palestinian sides, who represents the Palestinian people? We know that Hamas is seen as a terrorist organization. I'm not sure they want to invite Hamas, to the table. But without Hamas, there will not be any solution as well. And then on the West Bank, you have the Palestinian Authority, you have Fatah over there. And I also have been, a bit surprised that, Fatah has not, been very vocal. Maybe they have been vocal, I don't know, but I've not seen them being very vocal about what's happening in Gaza, and then they also have their own problems, So my question is that if we are to move forward to do a dialogue between the Israeli and the Palestinians, whom on the Palestinian sides are we expecting to represent, the wishes of the Palestinian people, taking into account that, representative from West Bank and from Gaza are not even united. So how do we move forward, in this regard? Thank you, Muath.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please short answer, please.
Okay. Since the events, by the way, the complexities and the crisis between Fatah and Hamas is not as long as you think it is. I know of people who are from both parties. They communicate regularly. They have no problems at all on normal basis. Although there was a small or an explosion between them, and of course a coup that happened in Gaza, etc. But what we know as a fact now, again, we go down to facts. What we know as a fact, Hamas and Fatah, to some extent with the assistance of China, have agreed to form a national government. They will have a representative from them that is willing to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people. Hamas recognizes that it has recognized during these talks that it is declared as a terrorist organization. Therefore, they said that they will not choose directly from Hamas representatives in order for the national government not to be discredited. Hamas, Haniyeh, before he was assassinated, stated on the record very clearly, not hard to find when you search, that he is willing to make a declaration of accepting Israel as a state. He went that far in order to make this national government go through. So I do have hopes that if something comes together, the Palestinian people are going to be able to pull it off and bring a national government that speaks on their behalf.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, and that's a very and promising scope. Yeah, you now described. Thank you very much. So now today's topic very interesting, and now already time is up. So thank you very much for speaker and the discussant, and for the interesting discussion today. So now I want to return the floor to Tunho-san.
Okay, thank you, Mikio-san. Okay. Oh, thank you very much for today's speaker, Dr. Muath. Okay, joining us and sparing your time and your very informative presentation. Okay, as I said earlier, that this forum serves as a platform for meaningful dialogue. Okay, not only dialogue but for our human networks. Okay, human networks. So I met in person Constantina last July. Okay, I met her here online, but my schedule visiting Eastern Europe, our conference there, and on the way I dropped by the Athens, and she showed me the Byzantine Museum. In fact, I learned a lot. Okay, the connection of the Eastern Europe and this Ottoman. Okay, Ottoman. So whenever you have a chance to come to Korea, I will be your host. Okay, so Muath, when you come to Korea, please inform me. Okay,
it would be my honor. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All of us, Sungho, for all of us. If I go to Korea, you also be a host.
You are already here. You are already here. Okay. But anytime. Okay.
Anytime. Maybe I'll go there this Christmas.
Okay, anytime. Okay. And also, I really thank you for all the participation of the students, particularly from Albukhary International University. Okay. So in the future, if we have a chance to substitution for your classes through this like a Thursday forum, I welcome, okay, with your students. Anyway, also I'll promote it, okay, more participants from different part of the world, okay, like a Global Thursday Forum. Okay, thank you again. And I'll just announce, okay, I have just a brief announce for our next schedule, okay. Our Global Thursday Forum is held every, by weeks, okay, 2 weeks. So December 5th, okay, December, how time flies. There will be only just very soon, this end of the year is closing. And December 5th, our next, okay, forum. The topic is quite similar, like another conflict in different region, Russia aggression into Ukraine. Okay, Ukraine. There will be different somewhat U.S. influence and NATO situation or something. And the speaker, Professor Vasilin Popovsky, and also Dr. Mikio Oishi will join as a second, the speaker or commentator. Okay, so December 5th, we'll hold our forum, and if you can spare time, if you are interested in this topic, I welcome you coming here to join us, and I will, issue the notice, okay, notice to all of you. So Hope to see you, okay, around, and take good care. And everybody, thank you for your joining, okay?
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, okay, Dr.
Lovely
Muath,
speaking to
okay,
you.
bye-bye. Everybody, bye-bye, okay.
Thank you. Bye bye. See you
Okay.
in 2 weeks.